Not only former smokers that you're converting.
There's been a huge surge of high schoolers using e-cigarettes or vaping.
Well, the FDA calls it an epidemic.
Children's Hospital in Wisconsin is sounding an alarm about serious health problems linked to vaping.
You're nothing but a marketer of a poison, and your target has been young people.
The Rise and Fall of a Vape Empire, narrated by Bro Code Unfiltered. Chapter 1. The mission. There are over 1 billion cigarette smokers in the world. A few years ago, a startup promised them something revolutionary, a safer, healthier alternative. But just 5 years later, the company's value had crashed by 95%, and their mission statement, once noble, had a new line added to combat underage usage of our products. What went wrong? Despite good intentions, this company helped spark a teen addiction epidemic, creating a new generation of nicotine addicts, most of whom had never even smoked before. This is the story of two Stanford grads who set out to take down big tobacco, but instead became it. Welcome to the wild ride that is the rise and fall of the most infamous vape company in history. Chapter 2. The spark. In 2004, two design students, Adam Bowen and James Monsees, met at Stanford. Since smoking was banned on campus, their late-night breaks became brainstorming sessions. One night, they looked at their cigarettes and thought, can we redesign this experience with technology? They weren't just trying to quit. They were trying to reinvent the ritual, the social bonding, the calming inhale, but without the deadly consequences. While researching, they stumbled on something buried in Big Tobacco's archives. Thousands of secret documents revealed decades of work on safer cigarettes, using vapor instead of smoke. But these ideas were abandoned because releasing them would have meant admitting cigarettes were dangerous. Adam and James picked up where Big Tobacco left off. They believed they could save 1 billion lives and make billions of dollars in the process. What could go wrong? Plume, their first startup, was called Plume. With $400,000 in seed funding, they built a slick-looking vaporizer. But it had problems, big ones, exploding prototypes, complex butane-fueled cartridges. It was more gadget than solution, and nowhere near as satisfying as a cigarette. Users even duct taped two devices together to get a stronger hit. Plume wasn't the future. Adam and James were crushed, but instead of giving up, they went back to the drawing board and came back with something far more powerful. The next device had a new mission. It wasn't just safer, it was better than smoking. James focused on aesthetics. The new device had just two pieces, a sleek body and a pod, effortless to use, and minimalist in design. Adam handled the chemistry. He discovered nicotine salts, a tobacco industry innovation that made high nicotine smoother and tastier, with flavors like mango and creme brulee. Suddenly, nicotine wasn't just addictive, it was delicious. The final product was sleek, potent, flavorful, and cool. It was the iPhone of e-cigarettes. This, they believed, would save smokers and change the world. The turning point. When the vape company realized its product had become a teenage phenomenon, it quickly shifted its advertising strategy, making sure not to appeal to minors. But by then, the damage had already been done. As if that wasn't enough, the timing couldn't have been worse. The grace period set by the FDA to regulate e-cigarettes was coming to an end. The company now had to prove something nearly impossible, that its product benefited public health in the US. But with millions of teens already addicted, making that case would be an uphill battle. A government report revealed an 80% spike in vaping among high school students and a 60% rise among middle schoolers. Over 3 million high schoolers were vaping, roughly 1 in 5, and this brand was by far the most used. The FDA responded by demanding access to the company's internal documents. Around this time, the biggest name in cigarettes, Altria, took notice.
You get a screen on the front here to be able to tell people how much battery life is left, because all these elements, if you're not a vapor, you'll sort of think that feels a little bit sophisticated. When you've made the transition across from cigarettes, battery life, you don't want to be out and suddenly find that your e-cigarette may fail on you. As if you imagine when people have started on a single-use product, it's a very simple device. You don't need to fill a product. Just take a sticker off, you go, and then hopefully you dispose of it responsibly, not into household waste.
Hoping to capitalise on this fast-growing industry, big tobacco companies waded into the market. British American Tobacco was the first to move into the space when it acquired startup CN Creative in 2012. Imperial then acquired e-cigarette brand Blue in 2014, Philip Morris bought UK e-cigarette company Nicocigs the same year, and Japan Tobacco Incorporation bought e-lights in 2015.
The old cigarette model in terms of volume declines was becoming much more pressured. There were increasing examples of countries outlining tobacco endgame policies within the next 10 to 20 years. There was increasing ESG overhang from investors and how the investment community viewed cigarettes. And we started to see these products appear on the market from non-big tobacco and take share from cigarettes, so they were a competitive threat for the first time.
The number of adults using e-cigarettes rose to 9.1% of the UK population in 2022, which is the highest ever, up from just 2.7% 10 years ago. Meanwhile, the number of smokers has dropped year on year and fell to 12.9% of the population in 2022, the lowest since records began in 2011. And those figures are translating into big profit
for you in the long run than smoking will be, because it's got fewer harmful chemicals and toxicants in there. The issue is, if you're taking in those harmful chemicals and toxicants, and you wouldn't have been exposed to those otherwise, you're then increasing your harm. So we have cigarettes at the top as the most risky thing you can do, then there's e-cigarettes underneath that, but the least harmful thing or the safest thing you can do is neither.
Yes, we are seeing increasing youth prevalence, but I think you need to put that one in context of other vices or other categories like cannabis and alcohol. But at the same time, we're seeing increased youth usage, youth cigarettes.
On camera, protesters gathered outside headquarters. Sales plunged despite not being directly at fault. The company was already the face of the teen vaping crisis, so they took the fall. Soon, the Centers for Disease Control launched public campaigns against vaping. Lawsuits flooded in. Several states moved to ban flavored products. The damage was irreversible. The founders stepped down. Leadership roles were taken over by big tobacco veterans. The original team, who believed in a mission to reduce smoking harm, watched their vision disappear. By 2022, the FDA rejected their application to keep selling the product, arguing it wasn't a net public health benefit. Although the company appealed, it was too late. They've now settled thousands of lawsuits and paid nearly $3 billion in fines. Their valuation plummeted from $38 billion to just $450 million. While the teen vaping craze peaked in 2019, other companies have since picked up where they left off, using flavors, influencer marketing, and even synthetic nicotine to stay ahead of regulations. The long-term health effects of vaping are still largely unknown. Even the CEO admitted that publicly. Among Gen Z, there's frustration and betrayal. One person wrote, "I never wanted to smoke, but everyone in high school was vaping. I was told it was harmless, just water vapor. We were so close to being a smoke-free generation, and then this company, hand in hand with big tobacco, wrecked that." The public health community remains divided. On one side, vaping did help smokers quit traditional cigarettes, with far fewer carcinogens. But, on the other hand, millions of non-smokers, especially teens, picked up a habit they never needed. By making vaping so appealing, the company may have undone decades of anti-smoking progress. This is a textbook example of how moving fast and breaking things works in tech, but fails in health. The vape company's legacy is a mix of good and bad. But one thing is clear: since the 1950s, Big Tobacco had been chasing a dream to create a product as addictive as cigarettes, but without the deadly consequences. And ironically, in trying to destroy Big Tobacco, this company may have handed them exactly what they were looking for.
The legal vape market is just one side of this story. In the last 10 years, illegal vapes have generated big sums of cash.
The market is worth between 3 and 4 billion. You could estimate, and intelligence would suggest, that the illicit market could be as much as 2/3 of that. So you've got a double issue. You've got unregulated product to a vast degree in the market, and actually then youths accessing the product because those retailers prepared to stop those products and not doing the necessary age verification. So a really big issue.
And there are some key giveaways when it comes to spotting illegal products.
The bigger puff device is certainly wider and certainly taller, normally quite square. So actually, if you see that as a consumer in a shop, anything over 600, you won't find any reputable manufacturer using cartoon characters or flavour names that are associated with drinks or food, because there's already legislation that should give you those warning signs.
Not only are illegal vapes taking a big slice of the vaping industry, but they're also putting users in serious danger.
We saw in the US a string of deaths and hospitalisation.
When Juul realised this was turning into a teenage epidemic, they completely changed their advertising strategy so it didn't appeal to minors. But the damage was already done. And so Juul was in a terrible position when they faced their next challenge. The 2 years since the FDA made their first push towards regulating e-cigarettes were coming to an end. And now Juul had to undergo a process where they essentially had to prove their product was a net public health benefit to the United States. Given that millions of kids were getting addicted to Juuls at the time, they would have a hard time proving that was the case. A report came out claiming an 80% increase in vape use in high schools and almost a 60% increase in middle schools. More than 3 million high school students had taken up the habit, so around 1 in every 5 high school students was vaping, and Juul was by far the most popular brand. So the FDA sprung into action and forced Juul to provide their internal documents for review. Around this time, Juul also drew the attention of Altria, the biggest cigarette manufacturer in the US. In the first quarter of 2018, cigarette sales had fallen more than what Altria's models suggested they should have, and they blamed this exclusively on Juul replacing cigarettes. Whilst Altria had launched its own e-cigarette, Juul sales were far ahead of them and doubling every 3 months. Altria considered this a genuine threat to their entire business. But as the pressure on Juul intensified due to the negative media attention and the FDA review, the company was in a vulnerable position, and Altria saw this as an opportunity. They figured if you can't beat them, buy them. So in December 2018, Altria executives met with Juul executives. Rumors began circulating around the company, and on the 20th of December, it was
Smoking is lower than it's ever been, both in the US and the UK, which would suggest that if these youths were not using vape, which is much safer than cigarettes, they would otherwise be smoking.
In the UK, e-cigarette usage is highest among people aged between 16 and 24, while 1 in 9 children had experimented with vaping in March 2023, which is up from 1 in 13 in the same month in 2022. So as a fast-growing industry both legally and on the black market, it looks like vaping is here to stay.
I think we've got to around the level at which it will be at its most popular, but how long it takes for it to decrease in popularity again is yet to be seen. And it's difficult to really think about how long a fad can last until they become less trendy. It's going to be a really uphill drive for us to try and reduce the youth use without having a reduce in the trend.
If you look at the growth curve over the last 2 years, there has been that demonstrable increase. That is great, because in many ways people weren't sure what it was about. What are these products? Are they the solution or are they the issue? Well, actually, hopefully it's been proven now.
You, sir, are an example to me of the worst of the Bay Area. You don't ask for permission, you ask for forgiveness. You're nothing but a marketer of a poison, and your target has been young people.
A high school student collapsing after vaping and was rushed to the hospital.
It took 2 days for my lungs to fail and I almost died.
Number of deaths linked to vaping rising today.
My chest felt like it was collapsing and tightening up and I couldn't breathe.
Pain, chest pain, lung damage, respiratory failure, and lung collapse. 68 teenagers tragically passed away, and among every patient, they all had one thing in common. They were all heavy vapors. I hope you found the story of Juul interesting, but if you want an even more controversial business story, go check out this video right here. I'll see you there in a second. Cheers.